Coming up on this episode of Belief Hole.
The phenomena that begins occurring inside the house is an auditory experience at first. It's sounds. It's things they begin to hear at night. There's gnawing on the bedposts. There's scratching sounds, almost like animals. All of these strange occurrences are at first just sounds, and then whisperings begin. We call it a witch, we call it a ghost, whatever, but we forget about these ideas of like goblins and fairies and trolls and these things that kind of are the old world mythology. Right. Some of these things have unique attributes that you could point to, be like, oh, that's goblin activity, man. You know,
Totes goblins.
We don't talk about goblins anymore. We don't talk about that stuff, but they have a distinct characteristic to them. And some of these attributes do come up in this story. I love that part of the story too, this dog creature
with a rabbit
head.
Most bunnies look pretty nice, though.
Yes, most bunnies look pretty soft.
They do.
And sweet.
It's hard to imagine like a creepy bunny unless they're Donnie Darko.
Ooh, imagine a dog man with a Donnie Darko rabbit head. That's like the worst possible combination of those ideas.
That's obviously a different scenario.
They were keeping it quiet. You don't want witchery linked with your family
right.
in 1817.
Potentially burned at the stake.
Goblins have an unpredictable, mischievous nature. On some nights, instead of doing chores, they will keep everyone awake by banging pots and pans and snatching bedclothes.
Do they do chores some nights?
Yeah, sometimes they're helpful. Kind of like elves.
They like fold socks and stuff?
Maybe.
The goblin sock
folders. I want a goblin.
Yeah. You never know what you're going to get. You could be like, really need my socks folded tonight. And then you might get a scare instead.
Exactly.
Boo! Conspiracy,
synchronicity, Sasquatch,
Donald Trump,
alien races, Satanism in Hollywood, MK Ultra,
Pleiadians,
Mandela effect.
Close the door,
Jury!
Close your door! Snowflakes.
Inner Earth disagreements.
My lab.
JFK assassination.
Flat Earth.
Corey Feld. Magicians are demons. Specters and sleep paralysis. Muslim Islamicists. The gender spectrum. Yes. Alternative history. Shadow people.
Shh, quiet, I'm trying to say words with the mouth.
Psilocybin. Sorcery. Poltergeists. Sulforaphane. Evolution. Is it real?
Skull and Bone. Elf Tower. I would never talk about it. That's old.
Y2K. Cover-ups. The Oklahoma City bombing. Vampire.
Well, hello, belieflings.
Hello, we're back again after a failed attempt.
Yes, we recorded the show all the way through the other day, and then
we had the whole show done, and I deleted it.
Yes, as you do.
As you do. I was like,
permanently delete.
I was cleaning my desktop off, and I was like, I should probably just delete the episode we just recorded.
It was literally like 5 minutes after.
It wasn't even that. It was like 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Oh my gosh.
I was gonna lie. Like I thought about lying and
saying
just,
like it broke later.
Yeah, I was just gonna I thought about like how could I just make it up? Like should I just break my computer and then say that I dropped it?
Oh, that was disheartening.
And then I was just like, you're not going to fucking believe what I just did.
I had that feeling like when you're at the top of a roller coaster, when you just like get that pit, you're about to drop. You were like, guys, bad news. And I was like, no.
You're not going to believe what I deleted the whole show.
It was hard too because it
was kind of a difficult episode to get through.
Yeah, it was a long one. We were all a little tired. We were enjoying it, but we were glad to be done with it. And because we want to move on to the next subject. Because this subject that we're talking about today, guys, that we're super excited about to do again, is it's interesting, but it's not what we thought it was going in. So we, as you may have guessed by the episode title, are covering the Bell Witch. Spirit knockings, goblins.
A folklore
of sorts, with some potential nodes of truth, as I like to say. Because there are corroborations that we will get to that actually do place certain people or verify the involvement of certain people, I would suggest. Yeah. So I think that's interesting. And these stories are pretty compelling. So we're going to tell some stories.
It's a pretty is it well documented?
Yeah.
There is a whole book written on the account.
There's several books, and it's a very dense legend. It's been referred to a lot as the greatest ghost story of the American South. And that's the thing. You know, it's called the Bell Witch, but when we started looking into this, and I'm sure a lot of you who are familiar with this story already know, the word witch was kind of a catch-all term. It was essentially anything to describe an experience of being bewitched or cursed or having some paranormal thing fall upon you.
Yeah.
That is some sort of negative interference or influence in your life, that they would call it a witch, whether it was a ghost or a demon, perhaps. A lot of demon attributes that we'll get to in the story. And also one that I've never looked into before, which sounds airy-fairy and fairy tale-y, is the Goblin.
Yeah.
But I'm excited to go
I thought
down
it
that
was
rabbit
just a
hole.
ghost that went around and was like,
Oh, ringing the bell?
yeah.
The bell witch. Yeah, he just walks around and rings.
I really did think it was some sort of had to do with the bell.
Like a bell tolling?
Yeah.
Because that was like the ghost that haunts the bell.
Yeah, I didn't know it was actually the Bell family.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, then there's a lot. Like we knew going in, or at least I knew, because we researched this before but didn't do an episode on it for last Halloween because there was so much to get into. But yeah, as a lot of our listeners know, and those will come to find as they listen through today's episode, there's not much pointing to an actual witch. It is more of like the poltergeist phenomenon. A lot of strange events that occurred. I mean, there's mixtures of
it's
cryptid stuff.
Poltergeist,
but there's also stuff mixed in with like strange creatures being seen.
Ooh, yes.
You know, it kind of reminds me of
Dogman rabbits.
Kind of reminds me of, remember we did Skinwalker and how there were a lot of strange phenomena that seemed to be going on around this property.
Paranormal Nexus.
Yeah.
It's weird because it doesn't seem like overly, well, I guess it does have some maliciousness to it.
Oh, yeah.
But at the same time, it seems like interested and caring at
Yeah,
times.
that's what's so fascinating about
Which
it is
seems to be taken, it's either multiple things or it's like a very emotional soul.
Oh, that's a great point. When our first failed attempt at doing this episode, we didn't mention there is a school of thought out there that believes it's multiple entities. And at one point, I think it gives names for these different entities that exist.
That would make more sense.
Yeah, because you have these different
Unless
attributes.
he's just a bipolar spirit.
Bipolar demon spirit?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is weird about the animal stuff.
Well, and that's why it does kind of connect to witchcraft when you consider the idea of witches and witchcraft and the connection with familiars. You know, you have an animal that is your familiar, your pal, you know, that helps you do your bidding, your things. I think I want to do an episode on witches and witchcraft in the traditional sense. And we could talk about, you know, modern Wiccanry and the kind of like, you know, more new agey type stuff. But the traditional sense, some of the old, because there are people that do still practice conjuring and these kinds of things. And I went down kind of a weird rabbit hole doing research for this. There's people that actually still practice like Faustian conjuring methods, making pacts with, you know,
demonic entities,
these entities that they may consider angels, like Enochian magic, or, you know, in Solomonic magic, or demons. But that's a whole other rabbit hole.
Spooky.
It is spooky stuff.
Yeah, I think what makes this one interesting is that there is so much on the record. I mean, we can debate the legitimacy of the account from the first book that was written by Van Buren Ingram.
Ingram, yeah, and Martin Van Buren Ingram.
They like long names.
1894. Yeah, that's the book we're going to be going off of mostly for this episode, but there are other books involved, but this was the first full-length book. There were reports about the Bell Witch previously in news articles and stuff, I think, at the time, but in 1894, this book was published, and it contains... There is a chapter, I believe, supposedly from the manuscript of one of the Bell.
Right, one of the Bell family members, Our Family Trouble, I think, is what he references in that. And then the other one we used for our resource was The Bell Witch, the full account by Pat Fitzhugh. It's much more recent than, I mean, Ingram was, you know,
and there's a lot of contention that we'll get into with the guy who wrote the book.
The first book. What
is the title? Do you have that?
Yeah, it's An Authenticated History of the Bell Witch.
Okay, that's the basic title. There's a lot of contention around it. There's a lot of people that researchers say it's all a hoax. There's the Ingram fabrication theory, which is that he basically invented all of it. And we'll get into that further on.
But it has been disproved.
Yes, and I found some corroborative evidence to suggest that specifically the chapter that involves the interest and involvement of future U.S. President Andrew Jackson, that there is corroborative evidence to suggest that the person writing that letter, at least, who was a well-known lawyer in the area, did exist at the time and had family living at the time, which would go to show that, you know, you're not going to include a letter from someone that lives in the next town that's saying...
Right, he can just call you out on it.
He could call you out and say, this is, you know,
bullpucky.
Yeah. But so there's some interesting evidence, and we'll get into that too. But first, we're going to get into some stories.
Yeah. First, before we do that, I'm just going to mention the patrons.
Right.
Josh and Michelle.
Yes. Thank you guys so much. We got your stingers coming up in this episode.
Coming probably hour and something in, maybe.
Yeah, probably after the second break.
Time coded.
Thank you guys so freaking much.
Keep the comments coming. Keep the sharing going. We appreciate it.
Yeah. And if you guys have a good ghost story and want to share it, or a good strange account, we are going to be doing some listener stories coming up in the next month leading up to Halloween.
Yes,
it's that time.
We're getting into the spooky season.
So our story begins when, in the winter of 1804, John Bell and his family embarked on a journey over the treacherous mountains of North Carolina and East Tennessee that took them to an area called the Barren Plains. Life next to the tranquil waters of the Red River proved well and good for the Bell family, and they made close friends with their nearest neighbors, the Johnsons, as they developed their farm and the family prospered. But just before harvest season, in the year of 1817, something seemed to wake with the coming season, and it all kind of starts outside the house, amongst the farmland. That's when things begin. And I'm going to start with a quick little story here of an encounter that the patriarch of the family, John Bell, had. The harvest season was approaching, and John Bell was out amongst his rows of corn, investigating the progress of growth and the quality of his crop. At one point along his inspection, he stepped out into the still space between two rows of corn stalks. He stopped suddenly when he caught sight of something down the aisle, something sitting in the dirt. It took him a moment to realize what he was actually seeing. The animal at first appeared to be a dog. The creature's body, at least, was most certainly that of a dog, but the head resting on top of the dog's shoulders and staring back at him was that of a rabbit. John drew his rifle up quickly and fired. The shot missed, and he fired again, and then again. John fired several shots at the odd beast, but when the smoke cleared, the creature was gone. That night, after dinner, the Bell family began to hear banging on the sides of their house, as if people were beating the outside walls of their home. Whatever this thing was, it would soon find its way inside the Bell home. So weird things. I mean, pretty weird to see something like that.
Well, yeah, I love that part of the story too. This dog creature
with a rabbit head.
With a rabbit head.
Yeah. And when I was researching this, I was thinking, because in the accounts of the family's experience on the farm and slaves that were on the farm and neighbors seeing different things they attributed to the witch because of strange characteristics these different animals and things would have. But it reminds me of like, it's supposed to be a shapeshifter idea. So I was thinking maybe at this point when he sees this thing, it's in like mid shapeshifting.
Oh,
maybe
yeah.
it's going from like rabbit to dog or dog to rabbit, and he just happens to see it that. So maybe it wasn't intentionally a chimera type half. It was just processing.
It is weird because
Well, that's most likely.
It's most likely, right?
that's probably the case. But it's interesting because most accounts of these animals that are associated with the witch throughout the legend is either a black dog, or a bunny rabbit, right?
Are there other bunny rabbit accounts?
Oh, absolutely. Around the area, that's what will be blamed a lot. You'd see rabbits around the time of mischievous happenings.
Oh, you talking about like familiars in general, like witch familiars in general?
No, specifically the
in
Bell
the Bell
Witch story.
Really?
Yeah. There's even an account later on, which I don't have in front of me, but just to generally summarize it, it was one of the descendants of the Bell family, maybe one of the children, they lost track of their parents' grave, or maybe it was their grandparents' grave. I don't remember the details, but it was someone in the Bell family. They were hunting rabbits, and
you're right.
They circled this rabbit around this bush. It ran right into this group of bushes, and as they circled around trying to beat the rabbit out, the member of the Bell family looked into the bushes to find the rabbit, and there were the two headstones of the
members of the original Bell family.
Yeah, that they had been looking for.
You're right, and that was a rabbit.
Yeah.
Interesting. I had forgotten about that.
So in the area, the rabbits are identified by some as being a representative of the witch. But it's interesting because then in this story, you have the hybridization of the black dog that you hear of related to the Bell Witch, along with the rabbit. Like you mentioned, it could be this process of changing between the two.
Yeah, I forgot about the rabbit story later on, finding the gravestones.
Yeah.
The rabbits with red eyes look weird.
Yeah, those are usually albino, right?
Are they?
I think we had an albino rabbit.
White rabbits with red eyes?
Yeah.
Those look
albino.
creepy.
Absolutely.
Most bunnies look pretty nice, though.
Yes, good bunny commentary. Most bunnies look pretty soft.
They do.
And sweet.
It's hard to imagine like a
scary
creepy
bunny.
bunny unless they're red-eyed.
Well,
white
if you
rabbits.
had a dog 3 foot high, 4 foot high dog with a
Well,
rabbit, a
that's
dog sized.
obviously a different scenario.
Yeah.
When I was first reading that story, I was like, that doesn't seem that spooky. But then I think like, well, obviously it's going to be freaky because there's two animals combined in one. But then I thought, well, yeah, I guess the rabbit head, not so scary by itself, but the fact that it's the size of a dog's head on a dog body, you know.
Almost scarier. Just because it's like a chimera. It's like
Right.
It's so unnatural.
Right. Donnie Darko, if you're having problems thinking of a scary rabbit.
Ooh, if it was imagine a dog man with a Donnie Darko rabbit head. That's like the worst possible combination of those ideas.
Would not want to be alone in an alley with that thing.
No. Great movie.
Or in the woods.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that was the first
encounter.
First encounter of something pretty bizarre. It is interesting in all the accounts I've read, it always says, and John Bell kind of forgot about the matter until after dinner and they started hearing sounds. And I was like, how do you forget about that? Like, how does that slip your mind?
Well,
I'm sure he probably, if it did actually happen, it's probably one of those things where he rationalizes, like, I did see that. It wasn't that.
Now,
it was a trick of the light or something.
Have you read because I think it is phrased like a dog-rabbit hybrid in the actual original Ingram book, right?
Right.
But if you look on Wikipedia, for some reason, it just says a dog creature. I don't think it mentions there actually being a rabbit head.
Could have just been a dog man wearing a rabbit costume on his head, like a rabbit mask.
Yeah.
Maybe he's just getting ready for Halloween. It was getting close, I think. It was harvest season.
That's true.
Or close to harvest season.
True. Maybe it was a rabbit he had killed and put its head on its head.
A dog? A sick dog.
Yeah. Oh, well, was it a dog?
Was it a dog body?
It was just a dog body, not
With a
an
rabbit
actual.
head.
I guess I was picturing like a dog man.
You always picture dog men.
Well, it's
every
'cause
story, every episode, you're like, but wasn't it a dog man?
I know. It's the only thing that makes sense anymore.
That's all that makes sense.
All right. Can I read my story?
Yes. Oh, John, you want to read the next one?
Well,
Okay.
I'm participating in this
Yes,
show
you
a
are.
little bit more.
So this is another kind of strange encounter at the beginning of the time.
This is still outside.
Still outside the house.
Drury Bell, John's third son, was one of the first people to experience a visual manifestation of what the family would come to call Kate. One day, Drury was walking along the fence line that bordered the country road, leading him back toward his family farm, when he noticed, suddenly, an unnaturally large bird of a species he couldn't recognize, hunched on one of the fence posts ahead of him. Once he regained his wits, he went for his rifle and managed to get a shot off before the creature vanished from view. Drury recounted that the strange-looking thing resembled something like an extraordinarily large bird that had some features of a turkey. When he reached the post where the thing had been perched, he could find no trace of whatever it was that had been there. This bizarre encounter occurred within a short time after his father had run across the black, dog-bodied, rabbit-headed Chimera amongst the corn stalks.
So yeah, that story is kind of interesting, but at the same time, it could have been a giant turkey-like bird. I mean, not necessarily related to the phenomenon, but it is
could he just
tied in the lore.
Could he have just come across a turkey vulture? And so the idea is it was just a big black bird in the same spot where he had seen the Chimera.
Right, but I think you could make the argument that, I mean, these people live very much amongst the natural world around them. They do a lot of hunting, they've traveled across the mountains of Tennessee. The wildlife's going to be similar to where they move from. So it's not like you're going to have a bunch of new species, really.
So it shouldn't be that bizarre to see a big black bird unless it was
truly strange
Did you
looking.
say an unnaturally large black bird?
Yeah, I think the quote was extraordinarily large.
Extraordinarily large.
Yeah, extraordinary.
I wonder how big that is. That's a very abstract concept.
Yeah.
Because it depends on what they're likely to see there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So again, with the stories in this case of the Bell Witch, a lot of this stuff comes from one book source material that was allegedly collected stories from the family. But over time, things get embellished, and it was written, pretty good amount of time after the actual experiences. So it becomes folklore. I think there's truth in these stories, and then there's exaggerations, and then there's some that are like, okay, that's interesting, but was there really anything supernatural to that?
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where you guys listen, and you can parse it apart, and you take what you will of the alleged factual accounts.
Right. Well, our goal is to present to you these stories, hopefully some of the more compelling ones, and then give any corroborative evidence that suggests that there might be some reality to these stories.
Yeah.
We're trying to provide that along with some of these interesting stories. So now it's still outside the house at this point.
Yeah,
The strange phenomena.
And the last story I want to give, and this is one I haven't heard mentioned a lot, and maybe it's because it is so fantastical.
Oh, this story, yeah.
This is a pretty fantastical story, and
This also happens before it comes into the house?
This is either before the spirit entity or what they come to call Kate later on. We'll get into why they call it that. It's either before it enters the house or it's shortly thereafter.
Oh, okay.
During the year period before other people find out about it. Because it says it occurs a couple weeks after John Bell has the dog rabbit head creature in the corn
really?
stalk. So it's within a couple weeks after that
Because
this occurs.
the person in this next story seems familiar with the idea of the witch already.
Well, he's familiar. Oh, that's true. That's a good point.
I kind of
Maybe it was a little bit further along.
I was thinking maybe it was even after the main stuff had happened. I guess it's neither here nor
Well,
there.
for our chronology of how we're telling the stories, we're giving the story of events occurring outside.
Okay.
But this one, speaking of folklore and maybe some exaggeration, this story has some hard to believe aspects to it.
Yeah.
But it is kind of a fascinating story, and who knows, maybe it
You
did.
gave me the crappy story.
He gave
Was
John
it a crappy
he
story?
gave John the bird story.
It's just so nothing.
You could have taken any of them.
You're like, why don't you do the birds?
I said, you want to do the bird?
Why don't you read the next one, John, and Chris, you can do the dialogue in it.
You want to read the witch quotes?
Sure.
So this happened to one of their slaves. They were slave owners, as much of the people were in that time. I think most people that lived around them. Dean was one of the Bell family's slaves who survived the journey from North Carolina in the winter of 1803. Dean was known for his skill with the axe and maul and was considered the best log splitter in Robertson County. He was known to be hardworking and honest. Dean's wife, Kate, worked at Alex Gunn's farm nearby. After most days, Dean would walk through the fields in the fading light to the Gunn family farm and visit with his wife. One night, shortly after the strange happening began occurring around the Bell farm, an unfamiliar black dog jumped out of the bushes and into his path. The dog followed him all the way to the gun farm and then disappeared. The dog continued this pattern of behavior for several nights in a row, meeting Dean at the same place in the path and following him all the way to the gun farm before disappearing once again. Dean grew suspicious and told his wife about the mysterious dog. Together, they began to suspect that this dog might in fact be the old witch that had caused so many problems for the Bell farm. Fearing for Dean's safety, his wife made him a witch ball out of her own hair, foxfire, and several ingredients believed to scare away evil spirits. The next evening, Dean came down the path, whistling happily and carrying his witch ball in his pocket. He felt comforted by it and was no longer worried about the mysterious dog. As he approached the place in the path where the dog had appeared the last several evenings, the voice of an old lady beckoned from the bushes.
Dean, what makes you whistle?
"Because I'm going to see my wife," he replied.
Dean, what's that you have in your pocket?
The voice inquired. "Nothing," replied Dean. The voice exclaimed in an angry tone.
Dean, you know that's a lie. You have your wife's hair wrapped up with yarn and foxfire to pester me. I'll show you, Mr. Smarty. You can't bother me with that.
Dean was terrified. As Dean knelt down and began to pray, the voice said,
Lord Jesus, Dean, what a fool you are. You can't pray like old sugar mouth. Get up from there.
"What in the name of the Lord are you going to do to me?" asked Dean.
Unless you give me that ball, I'm going to turn you into a horse and ride you across the Red River to the still house.
His hands trembling in fear, Dean pulled the witch ball out of his pocket. It began to swell and grow until he could no longer hold it. It fell from his grip, and as soon as the witch ball hit the ground, it burst into flames and began smoking so strong and thick that it almost took his breath away. Just as he caught his breath, he heard a crackling noise behind him and looked around to see what it was. Dean saw what had become a familiar sight, the mysterious black dog. It stepped from the bushes where he had heard the old lady's voice a minute earlier, just as it had before, only this time its mouth was open, and it was walking with its head hung low, slowly towards him. When the dog got within reach, Dean pulled his axe from his belt and swung it hard, splitting the dog's head in two. The dog rolled over, jerking and contorting for several minutes. Then suddenly, the dog jumped up into the air and fell to the ground beside the burning witch ball. The ball shot up into the air and blazed out over the field and was never seen again. After sitting on the ground for several minutes, catching his breath, Dean looked up and saw the dog he thought was dead slowly get up and walk back into the bushes. Only this time, it had two heads instead of one. So, yeah.
That's pretty normal.
That's pretty believable.
Average day on the
Great
farm.
job on that witch voice, John.
Thank you.
Yeah, and there's that black dog again.
There's a black dog thing again. I mean, so who knows how much, if any, of this particular account is factual, but
Probably a lot of it.
I think it's definitely possible there are attributes. I mean, maybe all of it's true. But again, I think there are situations in the Bell Witch history where there's folklore that's kind of exaggerated from actual stories that did occur. And I think it's very possible that there was some authenticity to Dean's story, and maybe it just got embellished over time. Or maybe
nothing
maybe that
ever
was all
changes
true.
over time either.
That's true.
It's purely accurate from the day it was born.
What awesome technology, though. Ancient tech to have a witch ball.
A witch ball.
Just when you need it, too. Just thinking like how awful it would be to be a slave, but not only be a slave, but come to work on a farm.
Or have to deal with like devil dogs.
And witches.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What a bummer.
Just a normal day at the farm.
But it's lucky that his wife knew how to make a witch ball.
That's true.
That's pretty awesome. Mm-hmm. Go get him.
So we should get into this now. The spirit moves into the home. Once it's in the home, there's a point where it begins speaking and it starts to give some motivations and some explanations of who it is and why it's there. And it seems to change its mind, give different stories, which kind of makes us believe that it's more of a trickster entity and not a witch. One of the identities it claimed was to be that of either the spirit of a local person named Kate Batts, either her herself that was there to pester John and wanted to kill John because of a land dispute, or maybe a familiar, as Kate Batts was maybe supposedly a witch, and then it sent an evil spirit that took Kate's name because that's how those evil spirits worked. Right. Either way, I think the research seems to point that neither of that identity or the identity of an Indian spirit that was disturbed on a burial ground, I don't think either of those match up. And I think, first of all, because it keeps changing its story, what it is, what its identity is.
Yeah, it claims to be at one point the disembodied spirit of someone buried in a grave nearby that had been disturbed. And there is
Native American burial
and
ground.
supposedly it was at one time where someone had brought in a jaw of
a human head bone.
Yes, a human head bone known as a jaw bone was brought into the house, found in a grave nearby on the property, and at one point someone had thrown it against the wall, and supposedly a tooth had fallen down underneath the floor. And later on, when the witch starts...
Just call her Kate, because that'll be
when
easier.
When Kate starts speaking, she gives an explanation for her existence being that disembodied spirit looking for her tooth.
Right.
But yeah, so we don't know, that goes back into the idea of this being a trickster spirit, something toying with the idea, giving explanations for what it is and what it wants, and never actually telling the truth.
Right. And so, the stories we just told, they're somewhat, especially the most recent one, they seem extreme and somewhat hard to believe. But now as the spirit begins to enter the home, we're going to hear some stuff that is going to sound familiar to people, a lot more familiar. It's going to sound a lot more like your typical poltergeist activity. We'll get into that. One other thing before we get into the house, there were other experiences that we just didn't have time to get into. One of the creepier ones, I won't do a long story about it, but it was where Betsy Bell, who becomes one of the two focuses of the spirit's rage and fascination, is the daughter of John Bell. And at one point, she's walking through the farm and she sees hanging from a tree a woman in a green dress just swinging dead in the tree.
Oh,
it's like an apparition, allegedly of this spirit or witch or whatever. It was just one more thing that was occurring outside the farm. That would be pretty terrifying if she actually did see that, a dead woman in a tree.
So that was Betsy that claimed to see that?
Who becomes like the central focus besides her father.
And she sees this before the thing comes in the house?
I think it takes place before it's in the house, but it could have been during the time period where it was also in the house. I'm not sure.
That would be interesting if it was before. That might have been the moment where the witch decided, you're going to be the one that I
torment.
You and John, your father.
Yeah. So at this point, the activity starts to move inside the home. The banging and smacking on the walls of the house that John Bell had heard outside, that started to occur inside. The phenomena that begins occurring inside the house is an auditory experience at first. It's sounds. It's things they begin to hear at night. There's gnawing on the bedposts. There's scratching sounds, almost like animals. And each child and both parents are starting to hear this in their own rooms. They're hearing these scratching, animal-like sounds. That begins to turn into what sounds like chains dragging on their solid wood floors, dragging across the floors. Then they start hearing what sounds like invisible dogs fighting in different parts of the house. All of these strange occurrences are at first just sounds, and then whisperings begin. An audible voice. They can't make out what it's saying, but they're hearing whispering at night. As the weeks go by, things get physical. People start getting attacked, especially Betsy. Betsy's getting scraped, scratched, poked, pinched, slapped. She's getting beaten. She's waking up with bruises. And Betsy is the daughter of John Bell.
The only daughter, right?
The only daughter. And this is kind of what brings the phenomenon to a head, is when these physical attacks start occurring. They go through this for about a year until finally she is visiting her friend over at the Johnson's farm. They're the family friends, and they see the bruises and they ask her what's going on, and then she has to say the strange occurrences that are going on at their house. John Bell and the rest of the family didn't want anybody to know what was happening over there. They were keeping it quiet because they're a good Christian family. And you don't want witchery linked with your family in 1817. It's not good news.
You could potentially get burned at the stake.
You could get in trouble. I mean, this is only like 100 years or so out from the witch trials. Like, it's still fresh on people's mind. It's within a generation or two of that experience
or at least
in Salem.
sort of shunned.
Or shunned, yeah. There's been theories people have expressed. Maybe they wanted this for attention. This is not the kind of attention you want as a Christian family.
This is not Facebook era.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Selfie
There's no
with
ghost hunters on TV. But they can't deny this anymore, and they can't deny it to their friends, the Johnsons. So the father, John Bell, at this point is like, you know what, okay, yeah, crazy stuff's happening. Come over. You'll experience it too. And the Johnsons are disbelieving that this is actually going to occur. They end up going over there, and of course, everything's normal until the lights go out. And then Mr. Johnson, or Johnston, depending on the reading, is attacked violently, just like Betsy Bell had been getting attacked, slapped, poked. But this begins the vocalizations of actual words being spoken, where she starts to speak to the family. And I won't get into all the quotes from her. It is fascinating, though. We'll link to that, places you can read the stuff that she said, because it becomes this phenomenon where the spirit makes claims, as we discussed earlier, about being the disturbed spirit of a Native American from the local area that John Bell had disturbed, or a claim that it was the witch spirit of Kate Batts, a local person who had a property dispute with John Bell. But again, constant different identities it gives itself. And then at one point, it gives itself 3 different, and I didn't write them down, but I think it's like 3 different spirits it claims to be. One's black dog, which makes sense given the sightings.
Oh, right.
One's some crazy word that I guess doesn't actually have, it's not a real word, but sounds like a Latin term. And then one's like the rivers. I should have written these down, but I didn't think I was going to get to this point. But one was mathematics, was one of the names of one of these spirits.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting because that ties into the teacher theory.
Oh my gosh, I never thought about that.
Weird.
Oh, wow, that's pretty crazy.
Okay, so just to briefly touch on the teacher theory, there is a teacher supposedly that has
the hots for Betsy.
Has an interest in Betsy Bell, who is his student.
Right.
And this teacher was a math teacher, geometry, I think. He would come to the house. I thought that he was liked by John Bell and Lucy Bell, but you're saying that you said earlier they didn't like him.
Yeah, so from my research that I had read about Richard Powell, who was really into Betsy, there was some research that made allegations that he was into the occult, not just their math teacher. And he was obviously infatuated with Betsy, and Betsy was engaged. And one of the things that the witch claimed to want was for Betsy to not marry her childhood sweetheart. So it would point to Richard Powell that maybe since he was interested in Betsy and wouldn't want them to get married, maybe he conjured something with his alleged occult knowledge.
Right.
It's just interesting because you did say mathematics, and I didn't even put that together. That was one of the claims it made, was that the spirit's name was mathematics. And if the teacher is involved, he was the math teacher.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like you have to give some truth in the deception.
Right.
Who knows? But
didn't you say some of the Bell kids had gone to school and like looked at some of his books or something when he wasn't there, and they
I'm not sure. Don't quote me on it because I can't remember exactly. It was a couple men from the Bell family. It might have been her brothers, went to his residence.
Okay.
And there was a book on the table that had symbols in it, and the guys knew geometry, and they knew these weren't geometry symbols. And the writing, they didn't recognize it as English, Greek, or Latin. It was some other unknown language. And supposedly when they walked in, Richard Powell came out from the other room, grabbed the book, snatched it up, and threw it into a safe or something.
Really?
Yeah. And he was like, "Oh no, it's an old book. I don't like people touching it, but it's just math."
If that story is true, then that definitely points a big sign of
If
him
it's true.
being a potential witch sending this entity to torment. Because later on, we'll touch on this, right? The Bell witch, or whatever this entity is, has a driven motivation to keep Betsy Bell from marrying her fiance,
Right.
for whatever reason.
And it's never given. That's the thing about this entity. It doesn't give a motivation for why it wants to stop her marriage. And it doesn't give a reason for why it wants to kill John Bell Sr.
But the year that the school teacher's wife dies is the year that she breaks off her engagement with Joshua
Gardner.
Joshua Gardner.
Her love, yeah.
She breaks it off that year. And I don't know if she ends up with the teacher.
I can't remember. We really should know that, but I can't remember.
Ooh, good timing.
But yeah, that is interesting. That point, I didn't put that together.
It was the teacher in the ballroom with the occult book. He's responsible. That's interesting.
But anyway, getting back to the spirit that's in there, like I said, it doesn't give any motivation for why it wants to kill John Bell, but it certainly does. It torments him. It torments Betsy, those two people. The other people in the family have different sorts of relationships with the Bell witch. The mother, Lucy Bell, the wife of John Bell, the witch seems to love Lucy. Just admiration for Lucy, calls her the best woman to ever walk the earth, manifests hazelnuts and fruit for her when she's sick, which is known to be like an herbal remedy for some of the things she was experiencing. Yeah. It seemed to be kind to some people, mean to others. It seemed almost more human in that regard.
Sounds like a bratty teenager.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
Just picking and choosing.
Yeah, like whoever's popular at the moment.
And that goes along with the attributes of demons.
Yeah.
You know, this idea of just neediness.
Shallow.
And this
self-absorbed.
Exactly. And this is described as being ego-driven, needy, like we always say, starve your ghouls, people.
Exactly.
Because you feed into that and they get stronger, as we'll hear in these stories.
And what happens, and it's very appropriate here, because once the story starts to get out and people start to come and see for themselves what's going on, the voice gets stronger, the witch begins speaking more, and then we start to see its abilities. It's able to travel quickly from place to place. If someone's out of town and the family wants to know, wonder when our neighbors are coming back into town, there was one account where it went across to the other farm and was back in a couple moments. and said, oh, he's in the parlor reading by candlelight. Come to find out the next day, he comes and visits after his trip, and he's like, oh yeah, I was home reading in the parlor last night. Things like that.
It could be a good guess.
Another example of that sort of quick transportation or even teleportation ability. There's a story of when two different pastors come to their place to have lunch after church, both from different churches, and allegedly the witch recounts both sermons for both pastors who are giving their sermons at the same time. I mean, what makes the story so fascinating and kind of unbelievable is that there are so many details about the things this could
details.
do. Yeah, which, I mean, to me, it's a double-edged sword. To me, it makes it fascinating and like, oh, there's all these accounts, but that also could lend to the theory that someone at some point along the way was fabricating some of this stuff.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because when you mentioned the manifesting of the fruit out of nowhere, thin air, we had coming out of like the Faustian, like making a pact with, a demon or these other worldly things. That was one of the things that supposedly he would do with his students to show them like what he could do, and descriptions in his book. I forget, it was like something Naturalis, Supernaturalis was his manuscript that's been translated. Yeah, the Faustian works. And that was described as one of the things that was done was certain entities could give you the ability to manifest things like fruits and, hot food, or another entity that you could call on could manifest a sunny day in the middle of winter. Those kinds of things.
You can have sunny days in winter.
You know what I mean? Like if it gets summer.
Ohio.
But
That's not true.
the teacher with that book, I just picture that, book of unidentified writing on his table. I just picture being like a Faustian manuscript or something.
Oh, right.
Because, those things were being passed around.
Yeah. They're hot ticket items back then.
It's definitely possible.
Occult books.
It's probably true. Yeah. So do you have any more stories before we want to take a break and get into some of the accounts that connect with our future president, Andrew Jackson?
Yeah, I did want to get into any. I know this is a lot. There's a lot to get into. We wanted this to be more of a storytelling episode. So if you want to dive into the research and read some of the conversations that Kate had with the family, we'll link to those because it really is interesting. But I feel like that's something that's been covered by a lot of people. We wanted to get into some more of the stories and some more of the potential connections that make it seem like there's maybe some more validity to this.
Some of the corroborations later on. Because I did find some interesting research that would definitely show the existence of some of these characters that were alive at the time that were referenced, that would make it awkward if you were going to lie about a letter written to them.
So let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll do some Patron Stingers, and then we'll get into a couple interesting stories with Andrew Jackson, right?
And a witch slayer.
Yes. So stick around.
Yes.
We'll see you in a sec.
See you soon.
I won't make it easy for you now. You got 2 minutes of my time. And I don't really break too easily, but I'm worth it, 'cause I'll slip into your dreams tonight. So just watch me. Just watch me.
Okay, well, we are back indeed. And before we start to get into the motivations of Kate and what it wanted and what it got, we'll talk about some interesting stories with a future president, right?
Yeah, let's do some stories here from these involve a historical figure of sorts. Well, I guess of the sort that you would want in a story, a former president of these United States.
Right. In the time of the stories, he's a general, right?
Yes, a general.
There's been suggestions that 3 of the boys of the Bell family actually were under General Jackson's command during the War of 1812.
Yeah. And
between that period of once they got to the farm and before the haunting started, they went to the Battle of 1812 and fought under Andrew Jackson. So
in a specific battle that supposedly was a really important battle that I think it had like 4,000 men, which is a large number, but at the same time, it's small enough that it would be a bonding kind of experience.
Right. And he did own property about 4 miles away from the Bell farm. So there's a lot of things.
3 miles, I think.
Okay, 3 to 4 miles. So there's a lot of evidence. 3.5.
What I'm saying is he was a landlord right nearby. So any stories like this
makes it a little more likely.
Yeah, like people came from as far as New York. I think one account from England to see or experience these happenings that were going on. So with information spreading that far and wide at this time, and you have a landlord of Andrew Jackson being only a few miles away, word probably would have gotten back to him. So these stories are definitely have a potential for being true.
Right.
So with that, we will tell the first encounter.
Oh, is this where we're following along? John, you ready for your witchery?
Yeah, I'm just going to give a brief description. So in the book, The Authenticated History of the Bell Witch by Martin Van Buren Ingram, published in 1894, Chapter 11 is a letter from a Colonel Thomas L. Yancey, and I'll get into the corroboration of him later on. Nancy Yancey, they called him. Not really.
That name wouldn't work well today.
So this letter entails these stories of Andrew Jackson and another prominent figure in the area, a Dr. Sugg. That story's coming up as well. Okay, so in the beginning of this chapter, it implies that Ingram asked this Colonel Yancey to corroborate some of these stories he'd heard. And he goes on to say in his letter that's published as chapter 11, Yancey, he says, look, I wasn't able to get a manuscript. I had heard that a manuscript was written, a diary of sorts, by Williams Bell, who was one of the children of John Bell.
Right.
So he heard about this, and he'd been fascinated as a child, having been born near the Bell settlement. So Yancey wanted to get a hold of these stories in the diary, because he was kind of a budding researcher of the witch at that time. So when he hears that this diary or manuscript had been written and been left to the widow of Williams Bell, he didn't know Williams Bell, so he couldn't get the manuscript. He couldn't ask Williams Bell, so he asked John Bell Jr., who he did know, to intercede with Williams Bell's widow.
Right.
And John Bell Jr. thinks that he can, and then he talks to the family to try to get them to hand over the manuscript, but they refuse. So in the light of that, he provides these stories that he had heard passed down from his grandfather. And this is where the Andrew Jackson story comes from.
Okay. Well, let's hear it.
Sorry, this is kind of a long buildup, but the reason I wanted to include that because the corroboration that I have later comes with evidence to show that Yancey was a real guy.
Right.
And was living at the time. So we'll get into that in a second. So this is the story of General Andrew Jackson's involvement with the Bell Witch. Okay, John, you want to read?
Am I in this?
Yeah, you can read.
This is your part?
You'll read the red. There's only, I think, one line in the first story.
Am I the blue?
And Chris, you're the blue.
That does make it easy.
You're General Jackson.
There's only one line for John?
In this one.
Okay.
But it's just
What part am I playing?
the witch.
Okay.
Okay.
Line.
Action.
Okay, so as our story begins, General Jackson is heading towards the Bell Farm because he and his men have heard the story and they want to camp out. And they're camping out there. That's their intention because people from all over have come and basically occupied the Bell house.
Who wants to see for himself.
Yeah, and they don't want to put out the Bell family, so they decide to camp out. So General Jackson's party came from Nashville with a wagon loaded with tent and provisions, bent on a good time and much fun investigating the witch. The men were riding on horseback and were followed along in the rear of the wagon as they approached near the place, discussing the matter and planning how they were going to do up the witch if it made an exhibition of such pranks as they had heard of. Just then, within a short distance of the house, the wagon halted and stuck fast. The driver popped his whip, whooped, and shouted to the team, and the horses pulled with all their might, but could not move the wagon an inch. It was dead stuck, as if welded to the earth. General Jackson commanded all the men to dismount and put their shoulders to the wheels and give the wagon a push. The order was promptly obeyed. The driver laid on the lash and the horses and men did their best, making repeated efforts, but all in vain. The wheels were then taken off, one at a time, and examined and found to be all right, revolving easily on the axles. Another trial was made to get away, the driver whipping up the team while the men pushed at the wheels, and still was no go. All stood off looking at the wagon in serious meditation, for they were stuck. General Jackson, after a few moments' thought, realizing that they were in a fix, threw up his hands, exclaiming,
"By the eternal, boys, it's the witch."
General Jackson's a drunkard, apparently. Maybe say that one more time, but it is the witch.
Okay. "By the eternal, boys, it is the witch."
Then came the sound of a sharp metallic voice from the bushes.
All right, General. Let the wagon move on. I'll see you again tonight.
The men in bewildered astonishment looked in every direction to see if they could discover from whence came the strange voice, but could find no explanation to the mystery. General Jackson exclaimed again,
"By the eternal, boys, this is worse than fighting the British."
The horses then started unexpectedly of their own accord, and the wagon rolled along as light and smoothly as ever.
Interesting.
So
I didn't realize that last time we did this, when you read the story, that it says the horses then started unexpectedly of their own accord.
Yeah. So essentially, the wagon was stuck
Yeah.
And once he calls out the witch for being responsible, the witch says, "Oh, you've got me? Well, I will see you later tonight," and allows the general to move on. Apparently, the witch has some respect for the general, and the general is none of them are that
Scared?
worried.
Yeah, I was going to say with that joke he makes about this is worse than fighting the British.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I guess they're
we'll
not
come to
that
find
scared.
That's one of his favorite sayings.
Maybe
apparently.
at that point, I mean, if this actually did happen the way it's reported, maybe at that point he's thinking like, okay, maybe this is like one of the kids playing a prank.
Yeah, I'm sure at the time, just like now, you'd go to a place with this kind of reputation thinking there's a great chance this is a hoax and someone's going to be playing a trick. So when you first hear something like that, you might be like, that's someone in the woods.
But it's weird that it was stuck for no reason. though.
Right. Yeah.
That's true.
And they, took the wheels off and
That's true.
Yeah, and then they put them back on. It just let them go.
and these are like men with horses. They're not like,
They're soldiers.
yeah, they're not going to just be like, it just can't move it.
Right.
It's like there's something really wrong
Yeah.
if you can't get it to go.
But the human's capability for rationalizing situations too when you're
True.
don't want to be scared. Yeah. That's the first encounter. Now, the next piece of story is from when they get inside the house. And again, this all comes from chapter 11 in Ingram's book.
And it's the same night, right?
Yeah. This involves the witch slayer,
This is great.
who is a pretty goofy guy.
I guess you'd have to be if you're a witch slayer.
Yeah, there's a witch slayer who apparently is brought along because he claims to be a witch slayer, and they think he's kind of a joke.
A witch master
But
general.
they tolerate him because his stories are fairly amusing, especially in light of the witch story. So they just want to see, what's going to happen. So they bring him along, but they don't really like respect him in that sense. It seems like.
Was that you? Oh, you're practicing.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, the witch is here.
Oh, creepy.
Scary. Yeah, it reminds me of the story that's coming up about the witch master or whatever, the witch slayer.
Yeah.
It reminds me of like that friend you have or the friend of a friend that you have that tags along and always makes these claims. Like we grew up with this kid who always claimed to see ghosts in the graveyard. Like no one else could, but he could see them. He could see in the dark.
Yeah.
Allegedly, he's like, I can see in the dark. He
He's
could
good at
also fuck your girlfriend. That was his claim, no matter who you were.
Hey, he might be listening.
That's true. I did like him, but I found some of his claims a little unbelievable.
Well, we should have him on the show to see if he would be interested in proving them.
Let's get back to the story.
All right, so this is the story of Andrew Jackson and his party involving the witch slayer and their encounter inside the house. Jackson's party was in no good frame of mind for camping out that night, notwithstanding one of the party was a professional witch slayer and boasted much of his power over evil spirits and was taken along purposely to deal with Kate, as they called the witch. They were expecting Kate to put in an appearance according to promise, and they chose to set in a room by the light of a tallow candle, waiting for the witch. The witch slayer had a big flintlock army or horse pistol, loaded with a silver bullet, which he held steadily in hand, keeping a close lookout for Kate. He talked much, entertaining the company with details of his adventures and exhibitions of undaunted courage and success in overcoming witches. He exhibited the tip of a black cat's tail, about 2 inches, telling how he shot the cat with a silver bullet while sitting on a bewitched woman's coffin. And by stroking that cat's tail on his nose, it would flash a light on a witch in the darkest of nights.
Liar.
The light, however, was not visible to anyone but a magician.
Of course.
Right? Sounds believable. I'd love to have this guy along just to laugh at.
You'd be like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Is
Well,
this guy
that's-
going to stop?
You're like, shut up, dude.
That's actually what General Jackson seems to say, as we will hear. The party was highly entertained by the vain stories of this dolt, yet there was an expectancy in the minds of all left from the wagon experience, which made the mage's stories go well, and all kept wide awake till a late hour when they became weary and drowsy, and rather tired of hearing the warlock detail his exploits. Old Hickory, or Andrew Jackson, was the first one to let off tension, and he commenced yawning and twisting in his chair, leaning over, and whispered to the man nearest him.
Sam, I'll bet that fellow's an errant coward. By the Eternals, I do wish that thing would come. I want to see him run.
The general did not have long to wait. Presently, perfect quiet reigned, and then was heard a noise like dainty footsteps prancing over the floor. And quickly following, the same metallic voice heard in the bushes rang out from one corner of the room.
All right, General. I am on hand ready for business.
And then addressing the witch slayer.
Now, Mr. Smarty Pants, here I am. Shoot.
The seer stroked his nose with the cat's tail, leveled his pistol, and pulled the trigger, but it failed to fire.
Try again.
Exclaimed the witch, which he did, with the same result.
Now it's my turn. Look out, you old coward, hypocrite, fraud. I'll teach you a lesson.
So at this point, the witch essentially beats the crap out of the guy. She slaps him around, kicks him in the butt, sticks pins up his ass, I guess, as the story goes.
She did that a lot. She did that to Betsy.
That was one of his
Not
things.
up the ass, but, you know.
Pins in the butt.
Like, on the
Gotta be
cheeks.
kind of painful.
Yeah. So he ends up running out of the room yelling, "Oh, my nose, my nose! The devil has got me! Oh, Lordy, he's got me by the nose!" Jackson, they say, dropped down on the ground and rolled over and over, laughing.
By the eternal, boys, I never saw so much fun like in all my life. This beast fighting the
It's funny if he sounded like that.
This beat fighting the Brit.
This beast's fighting the British.
Presently, the witch was on hand and joined in the laugh.
Lord Jesus!
It exclaimed.
How the old devil did run and beg. I'll bet he won't come here again with his old horse pistol to shoot me. I guess that's fun enough for tonight. You can go to bed now. I will come tomorrow night and show you another rascal in this crowd.
So then they end up leaving. They don't stay the night. They
This is
spend
a
the night in
talky
Springfield.
spirit.
Yeah, this is what's interesting too.
vocal.
If you would consider the idea that it is a trickster demon of sorts or an entity conjured, it could take the form, like calling people smarty and,
Right.
by the devil, about, oh lordy. Using the vernacular at the time, you could argue that it was sound like an old creepy witch just to embody that persona. When it could be something completely
Or
different.
you could also make the argument that Ingram wrote this and he didn't have an actual letter, and when he wrote it, or the guy who wrote the letter was a retelling of what he had heard from one of the Bell family members.
Right, and they're using the vernacular of
They're
the time.
writing it how they would remember words being said. I mean, either it's true or not.
Yeah.
Zach Baggins from Ghost Adventures would kill to get an EVP with this.
Oh, I know. Oh my gosh, can you imagine that? No one would believe it. No, there's no way anybody would believe this if you did. Because
it's too much.
Yeah, it's too much.
Yeah.
People would be like, no ghost would talk that much. That's crazy.
But this one did.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and tell the remaining story, and then we got some interesting connections to go through.
Oh, yeah.
There's one more story from a prominent member of the community, a doctor, Dr. Sugg, and this story recounts another auditory experience. There's this familiar theme, like you said, the sound of gnawing on bedposts and things, where there would actually
Scratching.
be no physical disturbance to these items that had supposedly been broken or gnawed.
All right, there
or-
would be no chew marks, no scratch marks, but you'd hear it.
But you'd hear it, and that's a familiar theme, as we'll hear in this story. So this is the story of Dr. Henry Horn Sugg.
Horn?
Yeah, and I only found that because I found his grave.
Oh, that's a cool middle name.
Yeah.
Horn.
Okay, so
Einhorn.
story of Dr. Sugg.
Finkel and Einhorn.
So according to this letter and the story of Dr. Sugg, the old Bell house had been torn down after the death of what is called the old people. So I'm guessing the original Bell members involved in the story.
At least the parents.
Yeah, the older generation had passed away. The house was supposedly torn down and moved, now owned by someone named Levy Smith, according to this letter. So this is a story that takes place in this house.
Okay.
Dr. Sugg goes to see a patient at this house, and the subject of the Bell Witch came up, and the man told about the strange noises he had heard and ridiculous things that occurred the night before in the house, and he said he was sure that it was the Bell Witch. Dr. Sugg laughed at the man and told him that it was all his imagination, that the Bell Witch was a hoax.
It's a hoax.
Just then he heard a terrible rattling of the vials in his medical bag setting on the floor near the door, where he had placed his bag as he entered the house. And immediately following the rattling noise came the sound of explosion, as if every bottle in the bag had burst or the corks all popped out. He rushed immediately to the bag to see what had happened and found everything intact just as it should be. Then it was the other man's turn to ridicule him. He, however, tried to explain the phenomena to the satisfaction of the superstitious man, and while doing so, the same sound was repeated with still greater force. And the second examination of the bag discovered nothing wrong or out of place. He said, "I could find no explanation for the mystery, and never have. It was so remarkable and unmistakable that there could be no explanation." So this skeptical doctor that lived in the community and did live at the time, according to the corroboration I'll touch on in a moment, he supposedly had told this to Yancey, who had written the letter, who had said that he had heard this from his own lips.
Right. Phantom sounds.
These are all, stories directly connected 1 degree away.
Right.
So it does give some credibility. But that's the phantom sound thing. And
Yeah.
we'll link, there's a video on YouTube too, to I believe it's Bob Bell, one of the descendants. I think he said his fifth grandfather was John Bell. And he's there, I think maybe in a reconstruction of the home, telling these stories. And one of the stories he tells is the story of his mom yelling to him and them coming down and hearing this crashing sound.
Bobby, come here, please.
and all of her china spread out on the floor, fragile china.
Yeah.
That they heard explosion of crashing and breaking. And when they come down to find it, it's all intact.
Weird. So it does seem like the same entity, whatever that was, because it's the same sort of phenomenon, these same sort of like phantom sounds. Nothing's really broken, but I'm going to make the sounds like it is.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting.
Very odd. Interesting. But yeah, so that's the final story that I wanted to tell. I think we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to go into some of the background and corroboration, and then the potential explanation of what this entity is, including a goblin, or perhaps something with hairy hands, which has an odd connection to sexual ghostcraft.
Oh, great.
So that's all coming
Sexual
up.
ghostcraft.
That's my term for it. I guess
like
I
it.
just came up with it. So coming after the break, we're going to get into that. So stick around, guys.
Patrons.
And we got our Patron Stingers coming up.
Patrons.
So hang around.
Do you get that?
Pizza.
Yeah.
Oh, little...
Patrons.
I'm hungry.
Hi.
And we're back.
Welcome back, guys.
Welcome back to the show.
The witch is with us as well. Is Andrew Jackson here?
No.
No.
He left.
He's in Springfield. All right. So, a couple points.
Are we going to do the patrons?
Oh yeah, let's do the Patron
Boy,
Stinger.
you really just want to skip over those, huh?
I was just looking at my notes here.
Which one first? Michelle or Josh?
Let's let the witch decide.
Okay, ready?
Mm-hmm.
Let's do Michelle first.
Okay.
So, Michelle, here's your stinger.
Hey everyone, this one is titled Michelle, for a lovely lady. How much L, excuse me, how much L is in a mish? A neat feeling she gives me from a distance. Her beauty overflowing like a sky-filled rainbow. Cool as a cucumber, bright as the day is long. Oh, Michelle, you are a true wonder of the world. Gracing us with her presence. Offering her support to a podcast that is so great, the Belief Hole thanks her.
There you go.
Flowers are temporary, but women like Michelle are eternal and nocturnal. She is truly one of a kind, and we won't waste any more of her time in thanking her and believing in her for believing in us. We are so happy you are here.
Yes, that was awesome.
I love the snaps.
That's great. That's very believable.
Poetry slam.
I was kind of making fun of it a little bit because I think those things are
the poetry slam
they're
stuff?
a little bit
You
ridiculous.
did it very well for making fun of it.
Yeah, those feedbacks were perfectly timed too.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love the nocturnal guy. Nocturnal. What is that about?
That was good. Michelle, I hope you liked that. I enjoyed that.
They will get weirder as time goes on because I
Yeah.
will continue to run out of ideas.
Yes.
And the weirder they get, they might become more enjoyable.
Weirder the better.
Weirder the better.
This one's pretty weird too.
Yeah.
And this is Josh?
Josh,
Cool.
thanks, buddy. We
Thank you, Josh.
appreciate you supporting the hole. Dive in, everyone. Dive into the hole.
All right, girls, this is it. Get ready.
Hit it!
Josh, he's our man. If he can't do it, no one can. Yay! He's so handsome. He's so handsome. Give me a J. J. Give me an O. O. Give me an S. S. Give me an H. H. What does it spell? Josh. And what does he do? Supports Belief Hole. Somewhere over the goalpost, there's a touchdown! Yay!
I'm having so much fun too. Me too, Becky.
He is so handsome.
Becky.
That was great, man.
He is so handsome.
I love their like conversation in between the cheer
with each other.
He's radical. I just love him.
Radical.
I'm having so much fun too, Becky.
It always does remind me of something. Is that where that is from? That little laughter there?
Yeah.
I thought it was like a Goblin sample.
No, it's like it's the end when they're laughing like together.
Lots of laughing. Well, I hope you like that, Josh.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. Thank you. I almost said Becky. That's one of the cheerleaders, apparently.
I'm having so much fun too, Becky.
Becky and
No, not Becky. You said Becky again.
I mean, Josh.
Wow.
Thanks, Becky. And
Becky doesn't exist.
No, Josh and Michelle.
You guys kick ghost butt.
You kick serious ghost.
You kick some serious bell
booty.
witch. And we love you guys. Thank you so much. It really does help us. This is what's going to keep us going, guys. And hopefully soon we're going to be getting more content. Eventually we want to, like John mentioned, we're going to be doing the double content subscription at some point further down the hole. So we really appreciate the help, guys. Thank you so much for supporting us. Those of you who are waiting for your stingers, they're coming up in upcoming episodes, and hang in there. And feel free to send us information about yourself, personal information that we can add in our stingers if you want them a little more personal, or if you want them to be weird and crazy, then don't say a thing.
Yep.
And we will just do what we do.
Cool.
If you guys are interested in supporting the show, go to beliefhole.com, click on the Patreon button, or you can make a direct donation by clicking the donate button, and that sends you to PayPal.
It's all tax writable off.
Yes, tax writable offable. We are a charitable
Don't know if
organization.
that's actually true. And now back to the ending part.
Yes, the beginning of the
part C.
Beginning of the end of the Bell Witch. Okay, so I just wanted to touch on a couple points of corroboration here that I thought was interesting. So this Colonel Yancey, who had written this letter that became chapter 11 of the book, where we got these Andrew Jackson stories and the story of Dr. Sugg, I wanted to know, because when I was looking at it, I thought, okay, and I'm sure other people have probably done this too, to verify if this person existed.
I don't think so.
And people in the area probably already knew, but I was thinking, if this story was published in 1894, and this letter was written about this colonel telling his tales of what he knew, that the suggestion that Ingram just made all this up, if there was a suggestion that he had made up the entire thing, including the stories from Yancey, then if there was an actual Yancey living at the time nearby, that would be problematic.
He'd be angry.
Yeah, being impersonated.
I didn't see no witch.
Have his identity thefted. So I wanted to see if he existed. So I looked and found a couple newspaper clippings where it does talk about Yancey. And so Yancey was described in chapter 11 by Ingram as a prominent lawyer of Clarksville, Tennessee.
So you found him in Clarksville?
So I found a lawyer in Clarksville by the name of Colonel T.L. Yancey. And he appeared as the defense attorney for a B.F. Thaxton, who was charged with the attempted assassination and robbery of a Mr. Jeff Garrott in November of 1883. So
he's real.
What is that, 11 years before the publishing of the book? So he was around at the time.
Maybe he died right before the publishing.
Well, and that's what I'm wondering.
Family.
It turns out his daughter did die. When I found her grave, his daughter died a year before the book was published in 1893.
Oh, so maybe he was dead too?
Maybe.
Okay.
But there is no death date for Yancey. No one knows.
Maybe he's still alive.
Probably. The Bell Witch has those powers.
Dorian Gray out there.
So he was, at least in the area.
He was a real person.
Suggestively, he would have had family in the area, although his daughter was dead. Now, the other man, the Dr. Sugg, who is referenced in his stories with the medicine vials that exploded, there was a Dr. Henry Sugg. I found his grave on findagrave.com, and we'll link that if anyone's interested in the show notes. But I found that he was dead at the time of publication, but it shows that his daughter was still alive. She would have been 54 in the area at the time of publication.
Yeah.
So she could have raised her hand and been like,
right.
That never happened to my dad. I never heard that story.
Yeah.
He also had 2 grandchildren, both alive at the time. And if they were in the area, they could have put up an uproar and said, hey, why are you telling stories about my dad or my grandfather? That's a bunch of bunk.
Right. And just real quick, that the whole idea that Ingram made up the whole thing.
Yeah.
It's been proven that he didn't at least make it up, that it was a story that had already been printed in a newspaper. Someone was recalling a similar incident, and they're like, this reminds me of what happened to the Bell family in the early 1800s. So that was already printed. So the argument that Ingram fabricated the whole thing, that's at least not true. Right. We know that now.
And we know that Yancey and Sugg were both real individuals in the area. So he didn't fabricate that part.
Right.
So the letter, including the Andrew Jackson stories, probably did come from Yancey, who was a prominent lawyer at the time.
Yeah.
And lawyers don't lie.
They are the kings of truth.
Yeah. Moving on from that, I also found something of interest, which was Ingram's obituary, which was published in his own paper that he had started, the Tobacco Leaf in Robertson County. And
was it an obituary?
Obituary. Resident of 40 busy years in this community is at last terminated by the grim messenger. Wow. Someone please put that at the top of my obituary. I love the way that this is written. Something of the history and life of work of Martin Van Buren Ingram, in many respects one of the most remarkable men who has ever lived in this community. The spark of Martin Van Buren Ingram passed into the great beyond at 2 o'clock Monday afternoon, October 4th, his death being peaceful and serene. The machinery of life had simply wore out, and undoubtedly an ordinary man would have succumbed sooner than he to the infirmities incident to one of his age. So they go on to describe him as basically being this great man.
Right. What was his paper?
It is his paper, and he could have been like, look, this bonus will be released
in his will
to you.
Was the pre-written obituary.
Exactly. So that argument could be made for sure. Although it does give him a slightly critical bent here, which was kind of interesting. They describe him saying, he wrote with a tireless pen while, if at times caustic, he always had a good purpose to conserve. A man of true mold, he despised all deceit, trickery, and littleness. Naturally, his was not a pathway strewn with roses. His was an aggressive nature, a fact which often brought him into serious collision with those with whom he took issue. So it describes it like not everybody loved him, but it does put in a good light, saying like he would write what he thought was true. And if it is true that he hated
liars and deceivers,
then he would be the biggest hypocrite of all time to make all this up.
Right. That's a good point.
Which is still possible.
Then again, maybe he wrote his own obituary.
The seasons in their bright round will come and go. Hope and joy and great ambition will rise up as they have risen, but he will come no more. His life is blended with the mysterious tide which bears upon its currents, events, institutions, empires, in the awful sweep of destiny.
Wow.
Pretty great.
Someone had a lot of time to write that.
And it's actually a really beautiful obituary. I'll link it in the show notes if you guys want to read. Just the way they wrote back then was crazy. That's some of the stuff that I thought would give some background and some corroboration to the existence of these people at the time.
You know, what I found that I thought was fascinating, and I hadn't heard anybody connect this before. So the Bell Witch had made claims that she would return every so many years. I'm not going to get into that right now. People can look into that. We'll link it. You can decide whether you believe that or not, and whether she had followed through with that prophecy or not. But what I found interesting was that this story reminded me of another story I'd heard about, where John and Margaret Fox had moved into this home and started hearing the same things the same way, wood knocking, started hearing scratching noises. Never heard a voice, but it was the same sort of communication through knocking.
Oh, the Fox sisters, right?
Yeah, it was the family. The Fox sisters became famous in the spiritualistic movement. A lot of claims that they were fraudulent, but communicating with spirits through wood knocking. But it all started 60 years after the Bell thing, when they had in their own family home wood knocking, and that one was widely reported for sure. So the interesting time with this is this happened 60 years after the Bell Witch, and it's a huge, well-reported haunting of wood knocking. The same phenomena, and supposedly teeth being connected to someone who was killed, and the teeth bones, and the identity that this ghost takes, that it says it is this person that was murdered by the previous homeowner.
In the Fox sister story.
60 years later, states away from the Bell incident, and the person who happened to own that property was another man named John Bell,
who supposedly murdered the peddler.
Right, there was this ghost that was knocking on. It's just interesting that it's like John Bell here, John Bell there, same attributes of wood knocking, noise making, teeth missing, just similar story aspects that made me wonder, like, if it is true and it's not just, another hoax situation, maybe this spirit that we know was able to travel allegedly across vast distances, and we know that it prophesies about coming back a lot. Maybe this was just one of her stops to come back and pester another person named John Bell. Maybe she just hated John Bell's, because she did end up killing John Bell. We should mention that.
Yeah.
Allegedly at the end, and there's a quick little quote here, just the story of his death. So the death of John Bell. So the whole time Kate is promising she's going to kill John Bell, break up Betsy's marriage, but definitely kill John Bell. She wanted him dead. So on the morning of December 20th, 1821, after years of tireless torment by Kate, John Bell finally drew his last breath. Immediately after his fatal seizures ended, the family found something out of place. A small vial of unidentified black liquid was discovered near John Bell's corpse. John Bell Jr. gave some of the liquid to the family cat, and within minutes the cat's body collapsed, still and lifeless. The spirit suddenly broke the silence, startling the family, saying,
I gave old Jack a big dose of that last night, and that fixed him. Fixed him good.
The creepy thing about her voice is there's some sensuality to its malevolence.
Kind of reminds me of an evil grandma.
John Jr. quickly threw the vial into the fireplace, where it shot up the chimney in the form of a bright blue flame. So then later they have the funeral. As the family members and friends began to leave John Bell's burial site, the spirit laughed loudly and sang cheerful drinking songs over the funeral dirges until the last family member had left the graveyard.
Yeah, so they hear this disembodied spirit at John Bell's funeral as they're leaving.
That just must be irritating.
Singing songs about brandy,
And terrifying.
supposedly.
Right.
Well, that ties into my explanation that I wanted to get to here for what
the
this
goblin
is.
thing?
99 bottles of beer on the wall. 99 bottles of beer.
Okay.
Totally disrespectful.
Yeah. Well,
Spirits.
she is a witch bitch.
Harsh, John.
Oh,
You
she's
don't
pretty,
know her.
she's pretty mean.
She's pretty bitchy.
You don't know her.
She had a rough childhood.
Anyway, the other aftermath was obviously they did end up breaking up or ending their engagement. Betsy finally gave in.
Boy, the witch really kind of won.
She was successful. She did. She was successful.
Starve your ghouls, people.
Starve your ghouls, don't feed them.
So this comes to what I wanted to get into briefly, which was what this could be. And actually, if you look at the full title, we'll link in the show notes, the source to Ingram's book. And the source that I had didn't have this as a subtitle, but the full title, according to that Wikipedia entry, was An Authenticated History of the Famous Bell Witch, the Wonder of the 19th Century, and Unexpected Phenomenon of the Christian Era, the Mysterious Talking Goblin that terrorized the west end of Robertson County, Tennessee.
Ooh.
Tormenting John Bell to his death, the story of Betsy Bell, her lover, and the haunting Sphinx.
That's a long title.
Right? And Ingram was known to go on, apparently.
Yeah.
But the talking goblin, I thought that was kind of interesting. There's this idea that, like, we call it a witch, we call it a ghost, whatever, but we forget about these ideas of, like, goblins and fairies and trolls and these things that kind of are buried in the old world mythology,
right?
Places that we've come from to this new world where we kind of given all that up for materialism and stuff. But it's interesting that some of these things have unique attributes that you could point to, be like, oh, that's goblin activity, man. You know,
Totes goblins.
We don't talk about goblins anymore.
Totes.
We don't talk about that stuff, but they have a distinct characteristic to them that a generic poltergeist might not.
Right.
And some of these distinct attributes do come up in this story, which I think is why it might have been titled at the time The Mysterious Talking Goblin.
Well, let's hear it. What are
Okay,
the...
so this is the description from Encyclopedia of Ghosts and Spirits of the Goblin.
It's peer-reviewed.
It's peer-reviewed. Generally, any type of small, hideous, mischievous, or evil spirit. In French folklore, goblins are wandering spirits who attach themselves to households, where they alternately help and plague the residents, depending on their whims. Sound familiar? Goblins are believed to live in grottos, but are...
It's their place of choice.
right? But you know how these myths,
Right.
like trolls, boulders and stuff.
They're attracted to homes that have beautiful children and lots of wine.
Yes, see, there we go.
Pedophile.
So you hear this attraction to Lucy, this obsession with Betsy Bell, and the wine. You said, Chris, in the previous recording that was deleted, that they had a distillery.
Yeah, John Bell had a whiskery.
A whiskery.
Jiminy Christmas. He had a whiskey. Still.
Yeah. So it's just interesting. Goblins are attracted to places that do involve like liquor and the singing of the drinking
So they want to get
songs
drunk and be around beautiful children.
and mess
Yeah.
with people like tricksters.
Very strange.
Like you're already creepy because you're a goblin. Then you got to be like a sexual predator.
goblin.
Yeah. So
Jeffrey Epstein goblin.
when they move in, they help by doing household chores at night and by disciplining children, giving them presents when they are good and punishing them when they are naughty. Goblins have an unpredictable, mischievous nature. On some nights, instead of doing chores, they will keep everyone awake by banging pots and pans, knocking on walls and doors.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And snatching bedclothes.
On some nights, instead of do they do chores some nights?
Yeah, sometimes they're helpful. Kind of like elves. Like
They like fold socks and stuff?
Maybe.
The goblin sock
want a
folders.
goblin.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of the elves, like the shoe
cobblers.
cobbler.
But
Yeah.
you never know what you're going to get. You could
Yeah.
be like, really need my socks folded tonight. And then you might get a scare instead.
Exactly. Well, they like to trick you,
Yeah.
They like to mess with you.
Or maybe they'll put like a spider in your sock.
Yeah, and
That's
they fold
creepy.
your sock, but they're going to stick something
There's
in
a
there.
rat in there.
Yeah, oh, you'd see that. But right before you jumped in there, the one thing that was mentioned was the pulling bedclothes or sheets off the bed.
Which was one of the first phenomenon that occurred in the Bell Witch story. Was the bed sheets being pulled?
Yeah,
off.
we didn't touch on that story, but that was one of the common things. Was it Johnston that was sleeping in the bed?
He had it happen to him, but also all the children.
All the children.
Right around the sound, like when the knocking things were occurring. or
Yeah.
the gnawing
And
sounds.
this is something that you still hear today.
Yeah, that's a pretty common thing that I hear from poltergeists.
Yeah, YouTube it. You'll see tons
it's
of
an
videos.
unnerving.
It's for your most vulnerable, right?
That would really be, like if that happened to you once,
Yeah.
it would be hard to sleep after
Oh,
that.
yeah.
Because you know that it has the ability to affect your physical reality and it's going after you in your most vulnerable place.
Absolutely.
In the darkness in your own bed.
Yeah, I feel like these entities still Like the stories still exist. We just have them in the modern era, but you can go on YouTube. There's a specific video that was fascinating.
Oh my gosh, that's
with
scary.
this guy. I don't know if you're thinking the same one I am, but there was this guy who would, his bedclothes, as they used to call it, sheets would be pulled off him. His water faucet in his bathroom would turn on, doors open, and he would have cameras in every angle. And of course, you could say it's all set up for sure. But some of these stories and these videos are actually super compelling.
Yeah, the creepiest one, and we'll definitely have both of these tagged in the show notes because I think this is pretty good content. But there's a video on YouTube of someone in bed asleep, and they've been terrorized every night by something playing with their feet and pulling their sheets. So that she puts up a camera. She lives alone, puts up the camera, night vision, and you see this little monster type creature so fast, but it's like a little goblin. It is really bizarre, and it jumps up like the speed is crazy, but it's slow enough where you can see it, and it jumps up and just like. And then runs back, but it looks bipedal.
Looks like a little
like
demon
it's actually
monkey.
walking on its. It's a demon monkey. It looks like a demon monkey. It is probably one of the most convincingly
terrifying.
bizarre
It's like
videos I've
critters?
seen.
Yeah.
And it's
Or ghoulies.
supernatural fast. It just goes up, and it almost its presence seems like it is there just to.
Well, it's
disturb
weird about
her.
that when you say that. It's like that almost is like what you would think would be a ghost if it moves that quickly.
Yeah.
It's like it could be physical, but you just don't see it because it happens so fast.
Yeah.
That's almost more scary.
Well, that's what's weird too is you see them like moving around in the bed, like aware that there's like they feel something kind of waking them, but they can't see what you can see in the video.
Yeah, you should link that.
We'll link that. I think it might be called like Demon Monkey or something. My girlfriend was fascinated with this for a while, and I wanted to do an episode on the Demon Monkey, like to see if it was a thing. And I researched it, and I found a forum post from 2012, and I had like notes on this and everything. But there were people that were like, has anyone else experienced a tailless monkey jumping on them in the night when they try to go to sleep? And there were other people in the forum that were answering like, this sounds exactly like what I've been experiencing since I was 5. I've never heard anyone talk about it. But now with the internet, people can, maybe it's a specific kind of demon or thing that in this reality.
Maybe some of our listeners have had this experience before with this little demon monkey thing.
Yeah. And it relates to something called the Sugg monkey, which is some kind of, I think it might be a headless monkey demon or something. But anyways, that was for a whole other episode I wanted to do. But yeah, we'll link those in the show notes, guys, if you're interested in seeing some creepy YouTube videos. But the last thing I wanted to mention here, I mentioned goblins, and as we're getting close to Halloween, that's the time, according to the Encyclopedia of Ghosts and Spirits, the time when they are said to roam the night when the veil is thinnest between the world of the living and the world of the dead. I mean, the goblin, just another thing that we've put a name on in the past, forget about in the present, but could potentially exist, and it could be coming through around this time of year.
A wandering spirit. It's interesting because I always assume the goblin, you think of goblins cartoonish when you're growing up, like they're physical little monster things.
Yeah.
The idea that they're wandering spirits that take forms, it does line up with the Bell Witch idea, where it's something it's a spirit, but it's also a physical creature. It changes, it shapeshifts, it's whatever it wants to be. It's like the it kind of thing.
And if it was a goblin, goblins are said to be hairy, right? So we're creepy.
So I never expected Trump charging into a goblin's nest to not get some goblin vomit and slop and blood on it. I just don't want to catch him in bed with a goblin.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Thank you, Alex.
But if he's in there rolling around hacking him up and he's got a goblin guide taking him into the cave, I'm not expecting him to not get dirty, especially up to his ankles.
Oh my gosh, that's so good. A goblin guide.
I wanted to actually play that song right then.
Was it Place Boing, I think, did a song? It was so great.
Anyway.
Charging into a goblin's nest, goblin slopping. Thank you, Alex Jones.
Yes, you're welcome.
You beautiful human.
You're welcome, Jeremy.
What I was going to say. Oh, yeah. So they're known to be hairy, right? So there was a creepy story that was on that chapter 11 from Ingram's book from Yancey. Apparently, the witch would only shake hands, allegedly, with a couple people in the county because she believed that only these men wouldn't try to grab her and trap her, essentially, by holding her hand.
That happened with one person particularly.
Yeah, there was Mr. McGowan. Yancey asked him particularly about the handshaking. The old gentleman talked about it with some reluctance. He said the witch did offer to shake hands with him, but he was not sure it could be called handshaking. He held out his hand for that purpose and felt something in his hand which felt like a hairy substance. Ugh. So that's creepy, just thinking like, okay, you're going to shake hands with this entity or this thing, and all you feel is this like tingly hair.
Why hair? What does a disembodied spirit need warmth of hair?
Well, maybe it's electrical. You know, that feeling of like electric static or something? Maybe it was some kind of...
Gross.
You know.
Either way.
So I want to know, have people experienced this hairy...
The hairy aspect.
The hairy
because
aspect.
it is very specific.
So I found a hairy hand connection.
Oh.
On a forum post from yourghoststories.com. So this comes from a 48-year-old woman, username Miss Doll, who details her bizarre experience with a spirit that became quite sexual, if you will. Quote, from that point on, when I'd wake up in that condition, I'd say, oh, it's you again. Then I would feel this unbelievable sexual energy and I would offer myself to him. And it was an awesome experience. In my mind's eye, I soon began seeing translucent images of him. He was not a man. He is some greenish lizard dinosaur type creature. He is not mean or scary. All he wants is to arouse me and play together sexually. It is as if he wants to transfer sexual energy to me.
Really could have done without this ending story.
I just thought it's interesting because there's this whole world of like ghost sex. And it goes back to the incubus.
Sounds
and
like a
succubus.
reptilian
Well,
idea.
the reptilian thing, you have that whole transdimensional, lizard people that we mentioned in the last episode.
Yeah.
We want to do an episode on the reptilians sometime. Just bizarre and creepy. But the reason I came across it was because in response to this, someone had posted and suggested it was a goblin because I guess one of the experiences was her feeling a hairy thing crawling up her leg.
Huh.
And you have that hair again, you know? Although, yeah, it doesn't really connect, but I thought this was interesting. This was the response. Some have written about goblins that you have been experiencing, but it's not a goblin. Goblins are called mare because they ride on people's chests and give them really bad nightmares. The mare is similar to the incubus and succubus, but succubus and incubus do sexual things to humans, while goblins or mares just give them terrible, horrific nightmares.
Yeah.
P.S. Goblins are little orc or dwarf-like creatures that are hairy.
I love when people make comments like that, like they know.
Yeah,
it's hilarious, dude.
Yeah.
It's like they're speaking like scientists that have studied
Just
this.
to inform you about the derivation of the goblin. The derivant thereof is.
I mean, you can say that like goblins are in tradition are known to have these
That's
attributes.
True. Yeah.
But yeah, to say what you got there is that's a goblin.
It's funny when they're like, no.
I'm sorry. You're confusing the incubus with the goblin.
It is not a goblin. It is a djinn by nature.
Obviously.
Let's wrap this up.
Okay, so yeah, that's pretty much all we've got, I think, on the
This episode is exactly the same length as the one we did before.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, there's a lot to get into. I mean, a lot that we didn't go over. There's so much history there, and there's some really good resources. We will link the books in our show notes as well as the internet links. The 2 books, The Bell Witch, the full account by Pat Fitzhugh, and he also has a great website, bellwitch.org, I think. And then An Authenticated History of the Bell Witch, which Jeremy quoted from a lot, by Martin Van Buren Ingram. Yeah, and there's so much. There's stuff that ties into future accounts that we discussed. We didn't get into prophecy stuff. There's a lot of
there's
want to hear
the whole
more.
Cave,
the whole cave, the Bell Witch cave stuff. So there's more to get into. I think we did enough for a beginning adventure into the story.
Our purpose was to introduce you guys to the basic idea and tell you some of the stories that we found more compelling, and then try to corroborate a little bit and talk about goblins and sexual things.
Yeah, get you ready for Halloween. Sexual, what?
Well, that was that story. It was just a weird story, but yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. You're
talking a lot.
I am me. Damn it. Okay, I'll stop it. Thanks, guys, for listening.
Let's end this episode with the inscription found on Daniel Johnson's gravestone. Neighbor of the Bell family, and this is on his tombstone. Remember, mortal man, as you pass by, as you are now, so once was I. As I am now, so you must be. Prepare for death and follow me.
Beautiful.
It's kind of dark for a tombstone inscription.
Well, but it's also like prepare for death.
Right.
You know?
Just
Follow
remember
me.
life is fleeting, basically, as a memory.
Yeah. At the time, people, maybe it was the Shakers or the Quakers, where their intent was to live in preparation for death. Or maybe it's Freemasons. I don't know.
Yeah.
I heard this somewhere. But so it's not necessarily a negative thing.
Well, happy Halloween. Well, it's not Halloween yet.
Yeah.
Get in the mood. We're coming up next episode. We'll be doing some more kind of spooky stuff, getting in the mood for the
Share
season.
some stories.
Yes.
Call in on SpeakPipe. We need more ghost stories. We need spooky stuff.
Yeah, we want to do a listener-based episode, listener stories. Give us your stories. If you know somebody, let them know. They can send in a story if you want. I think it's a cool idea. Go to our Facebook page, find our call-out advertisement for stories, and tag them in that post. And then they'll have easy access, one click away to leave their message. But yeah, guys, want to hear some more stories? We got some good ones already, and we're ready for more. And we hope you guys are getting in the spirit.
Not too much, though. You don't want to become the spirit.
You don't want to turn into a ghoul.
Don't feed your spirits. Starve your ghouls.
I think they get it.
Jimmy's really trying to sell that merch.
Memorize that slogan. It's going to be a t-shirt.
All right.
We love you guys. Thanks for being here. And we'll see. Oh, next time, probably going to do Black-Eyed Kids. So if you guys have any encounters with Black-Eyed Kids.
Or sometime during the season.
Yeah, coming up here. Good patron. Thank you, Ben. He wrote in with that suggestion. So it's going to be coming up soon because I love that idea. So if you guys have any, send them in.
All right, bye, guys.
All right. Over and out.
Wait, should the witch say goodbye?
Goodbye. Goodbye, kitties. I'll see you next episode.
That was very great
I
grammar.
don't know what the hell that was.
I liked it.
Okay, I'm done.
Bye, the Eternal. We'll see you next time.
Over and out.